G'day everyone and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez, welcoming you back to our ongoing podcast series. So today's podcast guest, by way of introduction, has been formerly the Chief of Staff to Sally Capp, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, is the founder and managing director of Fireside, and is currently a board member with the Gertrude Contemporary. Can I welcome to the podcast Ben Hart? How are you, Ben?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to come on.
Mate, it's brilliant to have you on board. So let's do something a little different with this podcast. I think I might start by asking you the following question. As a leader, and given that you've had some very interesting leadership experiences, in your experience, what's the most difficult part of leadership, mate?
From my experience, I would say, from a personal point of view, what I wasn't really expecting before I became a leader was the loneliness that sometimes comes from it. I'm a very social person, and the experience of having to be a separate person from those that you work with, and really kind of going from the person who sits out on the floor to being the person who sits in the office or and sets the direction. Obviously there's a lot of great things about it, and it's exhilarating, and there's a lot of purpose and accomplishment that can come from it, but you are, by the nature of the role, separate. And nobody wants to be the David Brent type character from The Office who's who's trying to be one of the guys and trying to be the person that everyone likes, and still trying to be the social person, because that separateness actually is important. So I guess I see a lot of other leaders now after that experience, and I see them struggling with this particular aspect with the loneliness of it, and it is a difficult thing, and I guess it is a sacrifice that you make when you go into those kind of roles, that you can't be one of the guys anymore, but that's okay. The other thing would be having as the book says, the courage to be disliked. I mean, it's really I'm also a person who likes to do the right thing, and likes to live a ethical life, and I guess be liked in my personal life. And so the constant being confronted with situations where doing the right thing is not necessarily the popular thing, or the thing that will have you be liked, is really tough. And to develop up that sort of, I guess that thick skin, and that sort of self-belief that you're not being paid to be in a popularity contest. You're paid to lead people, and paid to take them in a good direction, is the most important thing.
I think you bring up something that hasn't been brought up before about, do you necessarily need to be liked to be an effective leader? Now, I'm not talking about perfect leadership, because I don't think there's such a thing, but yeah, in your travels, did you find in your early career as a leader, if you can think back to whatever that role might have been, that you wanted to be more liked than respected? And is it the case that as you mature into leadership, that it's about developing a sense of respect, and whether people like you or not personally is neither here nor there?
Yeah, I think there's my first leadership role was as the Chief of Staff to a state government minister in the third term of the Labor government in the noughties, and I went from being a press secretary to being a Chief of Staff to quite a senior minister. I think I was 30 at the time, so reasonably young, although advisors are often quite young these days. Yeah, I mean, I think back on those days about how I conducted myself, and politics is a bit different to probably normal management, because there is a bit of a rough and tumble, and it's a fiercely contested space, and you're going into battle every day. And I guess there's part of me which I really kind of quite enjoyed the combat of that. And so, it's probably part of the culture that you're sort of butting heads, and you're kind of ruffling a few feathers to get what you want. And that's both internally and in the broader kind of political context, in that contest of ideas that happens every day. But I guess, there was a difference between, if this makes sense, the kind of the things that you were doing to kind of advance your minister politically, which were often, pretty hard-edged things, because that's politics. But then there's the fact that you're also managing an office of people, and often quite young people who, like young, intelligent, highly motivated people, but young nevertheless. I think back then I found it much easier to do the first one than the second one. And the second one, because you're going into battle with these people, you can end up being quite quite sort of protective of them. And that's when the kind of the need to be liked and the difficulty in making the hard decisions on a staffing level and on a kind of a internal level where you maybe had to let someone go who wasn't performing, that kind of thing I found incredibly difficult as a younger person who, you know, hadn't done that kind of thing before. That was really, you know, a bit of a baptism of fire for me. And it was, but the political stuff was actually much easier because, you know, you're out there, you know, advancing a policy agenda, you're out there kind of making hard decisions, you know, cutting deals, you know, with other parliamentarians, you know, with lobby groups, that kind of thing. And, you know, I mean, I always felt like I kind of operated in an ethical way with that, but I found it much hard to be unpopular in the political. I found it much easier to be unpopular in the political sphere than I did with my own staff. And, you know, that's a reflection that I've had. You have to be tough on both fronts. And you have to, you know, when you're leading, even if you're leading a small group of people in an office, making the right call, not the popular call, is always the important thing.
Political imperative to do what you need to do as a minister. And then part of a government, there are some competing interests there, I would have thought. And that's not necessarily a reflection on your leadership, but you're working to politicians who are taking on what is invariably leadership roles. They may not see them as that, but that's invariably what they're doing.
You know, there's obviously a lot of politicians out there, but there's not many leaders. And just because you're a politician, and even if you're a minister, doesn't mean necessarily you're an effective leader leading a state or a country into a better place. Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of politicians, you know, in my view, that who would really benefit from some good leadership training.
How, in your travels as a leader, do you measure success, mate?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a kind of very narrow definition of success, which is kind of, you know, are you working to the plan and are you achieving the plan? You know, as I get older, that's obviously, to go back to the political stuff, that's obviously super, you know, that's the primary thing to do. Like you're getting the outcome. You're making sure that your government's re-elected at the next election. You're getting the wins every day. But as I get older, it's much more of a nuanced kind of story about, you know, the people around you and the organisation that you're leading, and about your own purpose as well. So, the questions, you know, when I ask, have I been successful in a role? You know, questions I ask are, have I been living out my purpose? And have I been aligning that to the people who I'm leading? And are they doing the same? So is everyone feeling purposeful? Am I feeling purposeful inside of myself? Are the people who are around me feeling that same? And that doesn't have to be the same kind of purpose, but that has to be their own kind of personal purpose. But is all that then aligned to the organizational purpose? You know, and other people to that point, are they achieving what they want to achieve personally? Are they feeling a level of self-fulfillment around what they're doing? And that goes to culture, you know, and people finding meaning in their work, which is obviously, you know, essential if you're going to lead people. In my work now, for Fireside, you know, a lot of my work is around helping organisations and leaders develop their narratives. So narrative development is one of the main things that I do. And so a measure of success is, have you developed and told a good story? And is it a good story that people have bought into and then followed you in that story? And is that a story that they tell their kids and their partners and the other people that they come across in terms of their work? You know, so for me, absolutely critical for leaders to, you know, have that story, to really believe it, you know, wholly within themselves, and have the people around them buy into that. And if you have that, then really you've got a very powerful tool for creating motivation, for creating strategy, and for creating action.
I appreciate you weaving in what you do now currently in your role, which is that thing about creating the narrative or the storytelling as you just outlined just before. Look, if I can unpack this just a little bit to tease out something that's of interest here when you talk about telling the story, does that necessarily come with a risk to the leader or the organisation? And by that I mean, I think particularly in the industry that I work in, by way of example, which is the seafood industry, the people that I work with, their BS radar is quite attuned. And so when you're talking about narrative, does it have to come from a heartfelt place of reality, or is it we wish we were here, the visioning type stuff. I'm just curious as to what seems to be the at the core of telling a story.
Well, I mean, I think some people hear story and they think it has to be a very personal story, and that's fine in some circumstances. Stories can take on many forms, and really, it doesn't have to. I hear what you're saying about BS and kind of making it all about yourself, and it's not about that at all. I mean, you can weave elements of yourself into your story, and people when they follow you and when they're listening to you, they want to know something about you. Obviously, you're not just a sterile kind of object there. You're actually a person, and what has formed who you are and your values and what drives you is something that people are deeply interested in, and it can be a useful tool to kind of motivate them to follow you towards a direction that you want to take them. But story can also be the organizational story as well. And if you kind of have a really strong story about your vision for the organization you lead, where did that start? What are your ideas around it? What's the sort of the meat of that story? That can be equally powerful as well. And so, the really powerful stories are ones that connect with people. And I talk about a lot about the hero's journey as well, which is a very kind of archetypal story structure, which involves like it's basically the Star Wars story. It's someone going on a journey and going to another world and meeting challenges and obstacles and returning triumphant. And this is something I actually play clips of Star Wars to executives to kind of talk about this, because that Star Wars was when George Lucas made Star Wars, he made it based on this structure, and it's a very powerful structure. So if you can tell a story about how you have or your organization has started at a certain point, met with adversity, come out the other side, met a challenge, and then return triumphant, that is actually a really powerful story structure. Then you've got people and they're emotionally engaged with you, and they then feel a part of what you're talking about, because they'll identify with that story, because they'll have similar stories themselves. So this is why story is so important, because it's that emotional engagement. And as I said before, if you've got that, then you can embed the strategy in the story. So you're telling a story about the organization. Where do we want to go to? That motivates people, and then you can actually say, well, this is what I want you to do to help me get there, and they feel part of something, and you've got them. And then you're all on the same page.
I've got to say, Ben, that I'm glad somebody now finally 60 podcasts in has mentioned Star Wars. I myself grew up and my Star Wars whatever. So for those out there, the Star Wars reference has now been made, and I wasn't the one to make it. So no, and I appreciate where you're coming from. I guess if based on that definition, I think there are a lot of stories out there that either don't get told or are not there. So you're left to guess about people's leadership or the intent of an organization, and that leaving that question mark out there kind of impacts on what you can do in that leadership space. It's a very interesting area, man, and just give me an idea for future podcasts. I'm going to have to steal that idea off you. And
that's fine. Feel free. Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that if you're a leader and you're not telling your story in some way, and you don't have to be kind of talking about what school you went to or like what your mum's second name was, or it's not about that. It's just about if you're not weaving some element of yourself into the way that you engage with people, then you're kind of leaving a incredibly powerful tool kind of left unused, and you're kind of fighting with one hand behind your back, because if you can tap into that story in a way that you feel comfortable with and that people resonate with, you can pretty much take them anywhere.
I have to agree with that 150%, mate. So look, let me ask you, I make a couple of statements to you, and I'd love to get your perspective on these. And these are about the experience of the leader, and if I can get you to cast your mind back to leaders you've either worked with or had contracts with, or yourself even, on the job experience develops better leaders. What are your thoughts there, Ben?
I think that it's Kerry Packer kind of said that university was only for people who needed to go there, you know. So and I did a journalism degree, and which took me 3 years, and then I got a cadetship at the Herald Sun down in Melbourne. And I mean, pretty much I reckon I learnt more in the first 3 weeks at the Herald Sun, just being a cadet there, than I did in 3 years of journalism. So, you know, I think it's with some things, if just getting thrown in the deep end is absolutely valuable, and, you know, can really be equivalent to you know, a lot of study. And obviously people have got views about MBAs and that kind of thing. I mean, I think I wouldn't say that my uni years were lost, and obviously you know, it's good for broader thinking, and it's good to have space to kind of learn. And the act of kind of learning as a thing, as a dedicated thing, is a valuable thing. Just to have a few years of dedicated learning, you know, to learn how to learn, in a sense, is good. I mean, my experience was that I could have pretty much saved myself 3 years, and just kind of, if I could have gotten a job at the paper earlier, I could have just saved myself that time. Yeah.
And that's no reflection on our great university systems.
No. I had a great time at RMIT. No disrespect to RMIT. Great university. Yeah.
No, I get where you're coming from, and so and you kind of answered, not kind of, you definitely answered the next one about formal education helping to develop better leaders. That question in particular, for some, said it's a spectrum. So having that on-the-job experience and having education as a form of toolkit to be able to get in and help you with the particular job that you might be doing. I myself, with my university studies, the one thing that I got out of when I finished my undergrad studies, which I think helped me to get into some doors with the kind of work that I wanted, but I haven't really applied those degrees in any great sense in my career since I've left the public service many decades ago. I think it was more about, I was taught in my undergraduate degrees how to unpack arguments and how to think, not what to think. And that was the benefit of uni for me. Now, granted, I would have liked to have been finished in 1 year instead of 3, 4, 5 years it took me to do my undergrad study. So I get where you're coming from there. Ben, here's another one, and I'm really keen to get your insights on this. Leaders are born, not made.
Yeah, and I think that's one that I definitely would disagree with. I mean, like, you know, obviously there is, you know, we're all not just a blank page when we're born. So we're all, you know, that we all come into this world with various, attributes and, you know, things that we could, you know, there's just stuff that you're going to be born being better at than other things. But I firmly believe that anyone can do this if they want to do it. I mean, there's certain personality types where it might be more conducive to it, but you know, leadership is definitely, I think, a learned, you know, something that you learn, and there's no reason why, just because you have to struggle with some things more than others, that you can't be a leader. I mean, it's a choice, really. It's a choice to be someone who wants to step outside and, you know, and chart new courses and, you know, and make a difference and, you know, have agency in their lives. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you're not good at maths or not good at this or that. It's you know, I think anyone who wants to do it, I would hate for anyone to hear anyone say, oh, I'm just not cut out to do that, because that's a choice that's a choice to sit in the pack. And, you know, obviously the world can't be made up of 100% leaders, or, you know, that's not gonna work. So, you know, I think there's a lot of people in this world.
How can you say that, having worked in the political sphere? Make that statement on a podcast. I'm going to frame that. And I get. Look, I totally get where you're coming from, and I'm still personally a fence sitter on this. I think I've met some people with no formal training, with no uni training, went to grade 12, and are some of the best leaders I've ever seen. And this, my supervisor at uni, so I'm still studying at the moment, would shoot me for saying this, but I think there is an X factor with some people that are just naturally gifted at the game of leadership, whatever that is, whatever combination of life that they've had, they're very good at it. But yet I've seen some in my travels, some of the best leaders that helped me out told me what their life journey was to be leaders, and they studied and they what was the term that was used a lot? The school of hard knocks, and learning from being cut down and then getting back up again and refocusing what you're doing. So yeah, I can agree with your point and also disagree at the same time, but it's a very personal thing. I think what you're saying before, that we're not born with what's the Latin, the tabula rasa, we're not born with a blank slate. And yeah, I 100% agree, but I've also met some polys that I think were born with that and they maintain that through their careers.
There are people who are definitely have that X factor and have had that X factor for a long time. But I guess my point is that it's not like it's impossible for anyone to do it if they want to do it. And there's a lot of people in this world who are not very good at much technically, but who just have a huge amount of self-belief and who get a huge way in life just with that self-belief. That to me says, if you want to do it and if you have that belief, then you can do it.
Sure, and I guess I get to use this platform being our platform while we're having this conversation to say that when I talk about success and I talk about the elements of leadership, I'm not necessarily saying on a paid basis or that, if you're making the most money of anyone else, suddenly you're the best kind of leader, or you've got you're uber known across the planet for having done something. For me, I think it's leadership and good leaders can be found in all walks of life. Hence my initially I would call it a scattergun shot approach with how I've been picking the people that I want to talk to, because I want to talk to leaders in all forms of life, whether it's volunteer positions, whether it's paid roles. Yourself, with your background, it's getting to the nub of the human experience of leadership that to me is of interest, because always someone is going to throw something out there that makes you think twice, and you've done it about in 3 or 4 of your answers. So again, I'm going to copyright this one and some of these ideas for future discussions. But look, to get to the nub of what I'm asking with some of these questions, and this is one's particular interest to me, I'm looking at certain capabilities in my studies, and I'm not going to go into my studies. I don't want to bore you and the audience, but enough to say that there are leadership capabilities out there. So from your travels, mate, what do you believe are the core leadership capabilities for you?
For me, there's an ethical element to it, and there's there is if you're entrusted to be a leader, then it's important that you're also have a good set of values. Being a good person, is actually really important. And I'm going to get a little bit kind of deep here with you. It's actually about, the thing that I think about a lot as I get older is around, I used to see personal development and professional development as 2 separate things. And I think there's an increasing understanding that to be a good leader, you've actually got to sort yourself out, and you've actually got to grow as a person continually. And there's actually not a line between the personal and the professional. And so I think the best leaders are the ones who've actually done the hard work within themselves to understand themselves, to work out what are their faults, what are the things that trigger them, what are the things that make them scared, what are the things that hold them back, what are the things that cause them, negative self-talk. And then to go on that journey will inevitably, there's no way it can't make you a better person to work with and a better person to lead functions and organizations into a better place. And so one of the things that motivates me to do work on myself is how that then impacts on the people that I work with, and how that increases my effectiveness as a leader. And that's a huge motivator. So it's not, I think in the past I would have said, well, that makes no difference to whether I can do the thing or fulfill the task or execute the strategy. But of course it has everything to do with it, because you're bringing yourself into your work all the time. You're bringing yourself into the leadership position all the time. So, of course there are horrible people who are also very effective leaders. That's always going to be the case. But I think that it increases your chance of being a good leader who's going to motivate people to action to go to, the place where you need them to go to, if you're also operating from a place where you're all the time improving as a human being.
Before I took on any sense of wanting to be a leader in any walk of life, I had a job, and I won't name the industry or the person that I dealt with, but this particular individual made my life as a up and coming employee extremely difficult. And it got to the stage where after 12 months of working with this person, my blood pressure was through the roof. I was feeling physically ill going to work. And I every time I left the building I was working in, it was like my blood pressure dropped to normal. But every time I walked back in, if you had a blood pressure monitor on me, it would have hit the roof. So bad leadership can be bad for those that are being led if you don't have a sense of yourself, that everything that you do, particularly with younger people that you're working with, I think people are looking for meaningful work and not to be stepped on as they're coming through. So I can fully relate to what you're saying now.
It's not just that it's having a negative impact on the people who work for that person, it's also having a negative impact on the organization, because I can bet that at that time you weren't doing the best job that you could. You weren't being as effective as you could be because you were spending a lot of your energy being pretty miserable. Yeah. They lost your effectiveness, and they lost you as a person who could help lead them forward, just because they had a toxic person there.
Yeah, and I think that having people with that narcissistic bent, or that just destructive bent in those roles is always a difficult thing. But that being said, and looking at this happened to me 20 odd years ago, so I have learnt, and I hopefully have matured over that time. And one thing I did take away from that experience, and the experience of others that have told me some more harrowing experiences than I've ever had, was that you can learn from destructive and bad leaders as well. And the thing I took away with it was exactly what you said. Leadership is a choice, and if you've got staff, and particularly young staff, with you, the best thing I think so my measure of success would be helping to help them be better than you at that job into the future. So hopefully someone in your organization can either replace you, or you're helping those people to be better in future roles, because no one ever stays in one place for any great length of time. I mean, the time of being in a job for 40 years is not the norm anymore. So we have lots of mini careers, I would say. I think I fit that bill quite nicely, and by the sounds of it, I think you've gone through that process as well, that you're not in one career for 50 years. So
yeah, and I've seen leaders who, they put their energy just into protecting their patch, and they've always got one eye out for who's sort of who the young buck is who's trying to take their job, and that means they weren't being effective, because they were being highly defensive in their roles. They were putting their energy into, probably undermining that person because they didn't want them to get ahead. It's not good for the organisation. If you're good, then you should have, as you said, you should be training people up to replace you, and you should be okay with that, because no job's forever. That act of generosity in kind of mentoring somebody to come up and be the person who eventually replaces you, I think is actually a great feeling.
Ben, I want to ask you one final question, if I can. What might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
It's about having the courage to be disliked, not being the David Brent, and having the courage to be vulnerable as well. You don't always have to be the Teflon person, and appropriate vulnerability can be really effective. And then, it's also what I said about the, inextricable link between the personal and the professional. And it's important to keep some things private, and it's important to have a family life, and it's important to have a division between work and life in terms of, not making work your whole life, but the contribution that personal development makes to you becoming a better leader and a better person at your job. That's what I wish someone had told me when I was 25, because that maybe would have sparked a bit more kind of work on myself, and a bit more kind of reflection on on how, ironing over those faults and getting better at stuff as a person, makes things better for everyone around you.
For those listening, thank you for joining me again on Talking Leadership, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast.